And at the end of 1,000 years, Revelation 20 verse 7, Satan will be released from his prison. Now we can say, why does God release Satan from his prison? And there's a reason for this. And the reason is to expose to the universe the corruption that there is in man. Why do I say that? One would think that after these millions of people who've been born on the earth during that 1,000-year reign of Christ, which is called the millennium, after they have seen the goodness of Jesus, His humility, the goodness of the saints of God who rule the earth, not like the corrupt rulers of today, and how the reign of Christ brings peace. He will rule with a rod of iron, it says, because that's how the sinners will be suppressed, even in that time. They will be suppressed because they will fear to disobey. But there will be sinners who have not given up the rebellion in their heart. They will be compelled to obey, thousands of them. But the saints of God will rule on the earth during those 1,000 years, and they will see the peace and the goodness, the lion lying down with the lamb. And they would at least have heard about how the earth was in previous ages when Satan ruled the earth. And one would think the biggest idiot in the world would know that it's better to be under Jesus than under Satan. But it's not going to be so. That's the amazing thing. That after 1,000 years, when Satan is released for a short time, and he's going to go out across the face of the earth, and it says he's going to deceive them again. Verse 8, Revelation 20, he'll come out to deceive the nations which are in the four corners of the earth. Notice the emphasis again on deception. He's not going to frighten them. He's going to deceive them. He's going to again tell them God's commandments are a burden. What He's told man for 6,000 years, and which so many men have blindly believed. He's going to tell them again, His commandments are a burden. See, for so many thousands of years you cannot satisfy, hundreds of years you have not been able to satisfy your lust. Now come to me. It's all a deception. You can't have any fun when you obey God. And the amazing thing is, there are thousands and millions of people who are going to be deceived again. To show, God is going to show the universe the corruption of the race of Adam, that even after they have seen the reign of Christ for 1,000 years, they're going to turn back to Satan, to live after their lusts. Gog and Magog. This is not the Battle of Armageddon. That was the First World War. The real First World War, is the Battle of Armageddon. What we call the First and Second World War is not really entire world. But here's what we read in Revelation 19. The Battle of Armageddon was the First World War. But here's going to be a Second World War. After the 1,000 years are over, Gog and Magog and these people are going to be gathered together again. The descendants of Gog and Magog a second time. To gather them together for the war. Again, to fight against the Lord. Can you imagine that? It's really so difficult for me to understand how man can be so stupid. The heart is deceitful. Nothing good dwells in this flesh. And here is the clearest proof of it in the end of the Bible, that after 1,000 years of the reign of Christ, man is still willing to follow the devil and live after his lusts. We see a little bit of that today. We see the goodness and blessing of glory that belongs to those who wholeheartedly follow the Lord, and still so many people live after their lusts in the moment of temptation, even believers. So one can imagine how there will be like that. And it says here, the number of them, listen to this, one would think there'd be a few odd persons here and there who are stupid enough to follow the devil. No. The number who follow the devil after this 1,000-year reign of Christ will be like the sand of the seashore. Amazing. That they can be so stupid. But they will be. And they came up the broad plain of the earth and surrounded the camp of the saints. They know very well that these people with resurrection bodies can't be killed. And such is Satan's deception of man. They surrounded the camp of the saints in the beloved city, Jerusalem, where Jesus has His throne. And fire comes down from heaven in a moment. It's not even going to take one day like the Battle of Armageddon. This is just going to take a moment and devour them all in a moment. And then, here is the final doom of the devil. The devil who deceived them. Notice the number of times in the book of Revelation where the devil is called the deceiver. Was thrown into the lake of fire. The lake of fire and brimstone is different from hell. I mentioned that. I'll explain that in a moment. The first occupants of the lake of fire we saw in chapter 19 verse 20 was the Antichrist and the false prophet. Now the third occupant of the lake of fire is going to be the third person of the satanic trinity. The first person really, Satan himself. This is the satanic trinity who are going to occupy the lake of fire first of all. And there, the beast and the false prophet are still there. When were they thrown into the lake of fire? You remember? 1,000 years earlier. But they're still not consumed. The fire never dies, the worm is never quenched, exactly like Jesus said. And 1,000 years later, you find the beast and the false prophet are still there. And the one who's deceived them and led astray goes down to join them. And they will be tormented day and night forever and ever. Forever and ever. We saw that about Babylon in chapter 19 verse 3. Her smoke rises up forever and ever. And then we read the final judgment after 1,000 years. This is the second resurrection now. Now the 1,000 years are over. Man's corruption has been exposed completely, finally. Many people think today that men are not following the Lord because they haven't seen the goodness of the Lord. That excuse won't be there after the 1,000-year reign of Christ. And I saw a great white throne. This is not the judgment seat of Christ. Notice, the judgment seat of Christ is at the beginning of the 1,000 years when the saints are rewarded. This is the great white throne at the end of the 1,000 years. And him who sat upon it, from whose presence the earth and the heaven fled away. And notice this phrase, no place was found for the earth and the heaven. I think of that time when Jesus came to Bethlehem, and a similar phrase is there. No place was found for him to be born. And now we find when he sits on the throne in the final day, there is no place found for heaven and earth. An earth which rejected him, there is no place found for it when he sits on his throne. And I saw the dead, the great and the small, standing before the throne. Notice that even after they are raised from their graves, when they stand before the throne, what are they called? The dead. They're still not alive. They're spiritually dead. Physically alive because they are raised from the graves, but spiritually dead. The dead standing before the throne. And the books were opened, and the word in the margin is scrolls. Perhaps you do not know, but I want to tell you that this type of binding of books, like we have today, is a very recent origin, just in the last few hundred years. In the time when John wrote this book on 180, there was no such book like this, bound together like this. The books of those days were scrolls. They just rolled it up. It was a long parchment rolled up. And when you wanted to, there was no question of one page to the next. You just rolled up one side and rolled open the other, and you kept reading right up to the end of the scroll. So you see what it says here? The scrolls were open. If you looked at a scroll, it's just a big thing wound up together on a central spindle. And the nearest thing that we have to a scroll today is a magnetic tape. That's like a scroll, wound around a central spindle. And we can read it like this. The tapes were brought out to be replayed. That's the meaning here. The tapes were brought out. Tapes of what? Of our entire life. And another book was opened, another scroll, and that was the book of life, the scroll of life. And the dead were judged from the things which are written in the books according to their deeds. Salvation is by grace. but judgment is according to their deeds. In other words, there are going to be degrees of punishment. Not everybody is going to get the same degree of punishment even in the lake of fire. There are going to be different degrees of punishment in the lake of fire. And it says here, the dead were judged according to their works. That means the Lord will press the rewind button in that day as each person comes forward. And his memory, in which this videotape has been running all through his life, long before video was invented by the earth, by people in the world, and the rewind button is pressed, and it goes all the way back to zero, and then begins each person's judgment. And will be flashed on the screen for the world to see. This was your life. And then you start from your babyhood, right on till the end of your life. Every thought, word, deed, attitude, motive will be exposed on the screen in that day for everyone to see. Each person, one by one, will come and have his turn, and the videotape will faithfully play back. He cannot argue against what his own memory says he himself did. There will be no argument saying, I didn't do that. It won't be like a human court where people can say, I didn't do that, and bluff and cheat. This is going to be a videotape recorded by his own memory that's going to play back everything in his life. And he will be judged. God will say, there, what judgment do you deserve? And no one will be able to open his mouth and say, Lord, I don't deserve that judgment. Everyone will have to give an account. Everyone. And in that day will be fulfilled the word that Jesus said, every idle word that men have spoken, they shall give account in the day of judgment. You think it's forgotten? It's been recorded faithfully on the videotape. Every word we have spoken. The things we have spoken in secret, others haven't heard, it's recorded on the tape. The attitudes and motives. It says in Romans 2, God will judge the secrets of men. The hidden things. 1 Corinthians 4:5, God will bring the hidden things to light. The hidden motives with which people pretended to be religious and pretended to be spiritual. Everything will be brought to light. The Babylonian merchantmen who made money in the name of religion, who used the name of Christ to build their own financial empires. Everything is going to be exposed in that day. No one is going to escape. The dead will be judged according to their works. And we read here in verse 13, the sea gave up the dead which were in it. Now, we don't know exactly what this means. Perhaps it could refer to some type of evil angels that have been imprisoned in some place. Because it says death and Hades gave up the dead too, which were in them. And it seems to me the sea is set apart from death. Everybody goes to death and Hades, but those in the sea are brought forth too. I want to see you to see a verse in 2 Peter chapter 2 verse 4. 2 Peter 2 verse 4, it says that the angels who sinned, God has committed them into pits of darkness and reserved them for judgment. In verse 5, it speaks about Noah, and it is probably referring to the angels who sinned in the time of Noah. Those are the angels who went after the daughters of men and committed sexual sin with the daughters of men. Those angels are not allowed to move around freely like other evil spirits. They have been reserved for judgment. Their judgment is also going to be at that time. This could possibly be what it refers to here when it says the sea gave up the dead. Because the sea was not part of God's original creation. Genesis 1:1 says the heaven and the earth were created originally, but the sea, Genesis 1:2, came as a result of Lucifer's sin. And so we see the sea gave up the dead, and death and Hades gave up the dead which were in them. They were judged, every one of them, according to their deeds, including these fallen angels who are reserved in pits of judgment for that final day.